You're watching the Y2K show, where they play my kind of videos. You're watching the Y2K show, where they play my kind of videos.
Soy Roberto, El Favorito Gringo, mi pelo blanco, hecho en San Mateo. Dime cuando ven a México, soy una California oso, más grande de mis sueños. Soy Roberto, El Favorito Gringo, mi pelo blanco, hecho en San Mateo. Dime cuando ven a México, soy una California oso, más grande de mis sueños. Es un nuevo año, nuevo tiempo, no ratos or latas, no preguntas menso, inteligente pero
quiet on the set.
Go, Bob! Y2K Associates. Hey, it's the Big Chip's birthday party. He turned the big. It's going down. Y2K Associates. The Chip's party is going down. Jimmy G all in the building. Yeah. Yeah. Hey! This is Y2K Associates. It's Chip's 30th birthday. We out here celebrating. This the Big Papa Will. You know what I'm saying? Just like back in the day. Y'all better ask somebody. YouTube, MySpace, everybody out here, man. This is how we get down. This is how we party. This is how we do it. Why not now? I'm right behind you, pal. We running for hip hop, ladies and gentlemen. We're running for hip hop. What we doing, pal?
This is Big Papa Will, man. We're trying to get to our show on time. Bus and shit. Can't get a damn ride. Gotta get over and get on the right bus.
But we don't give a fuck 'cause we don't.
Coming to the stage right now, I know it's Mr. $2K. I know that. That's it, Mr. 2K. Y'all give it up for Mr. 2K.
See, he fucked me up already. It's Papa Will. So the DJ could have had at least a chance to get. the 60s, maybe the 70s, damn yo. in a situation where it ain't really been bad. Because, you know, I'm kind of people who always think that it could be better, you know. But my internet connection, I can't, you know, when you're in touch with the electrical aspect of existence, and you know, yeah. I'm just trying to see if it's gonna do it because, man, I don't really want. Hey, what's up, nephew? Oh man, just trying to get up in here and get another show on. You know, I'm trying to do the show today for all my friends that, you know, I think somebody was Catitude or somebody was in the show. You know, see if we can find something about Irish. What they had to go through. So I think I found some now. I got to relocate it here. Oh, here it is. Okay, I got it. I'm just gonna move this up to the top. Then I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna open it. And so I'm just still checking the engine, you know. If this ship has got any kind of problems with the engine, it just ain't gonna sail, right? So I'm trying to make sure that we're past all the bumps in the road, you know, that we call them when we're always moving ahead to be successful. That's something that we're doing. You know, is it gonna play or is it gonna not play? Is it gonna be ready to go? Or we're gonna be stumbling and bumbling? But today's show, you know, the headline on it says Native Americans fighting Native Americans. Sound familiar? Well, guess what? This wasn't the only place that this was going down like this. So this is what we're gonna be looking at today. We're gonna be looking at, you know, a brief showing on what the Irish had to go through during the same time period, just so that you understand that this wasn't an American thing. You know, it was people. I'm gonna call them people of Afros. Yeah, people of Afros. That sounds indigenous wherever you see that at, right? People of Afros. That's my new thing. I'm gonna write that down. You know, wherever you go, people of Afros are there. People of Afros. I gotta put that, you know, that's because to me, I don't even have an Afro anymore, but the time period that we're looking at in our existence, it is people of Afro time period. Because everywhere we look, when Curimayo can actually find those hidden treasures that solidify the receipts that this stuff really was true. These adventures, these books, these readings, these sightings, these reportings, you know, all these things required to ensure that it's real. I trust him. He said, would you recommend this man? Yes, I will. So if there's any aspect of anything you think might not be quite as it really happened, you know, just I could give you his link to his site. He would love that if you just came there and you looked through his library and found the particular video that you wanted to see that you was pretty sure was going to express how you felt. Okay? Okay, I'm here. All right, y'all. This is gonna. Here we go. We're gonna take a shot. We're about to blast off now. I done reloaded it as much as I think I'm capable of reloading it, and now I'm just gonna give it to us. Let's see what we get. I can't say what crap, avoid, or absence of give me what I'm paying for that I'm sitting in the middle of now. And I don't want so far as to bring the whole box over and up here with me. I mean, nobody uses it but me. And this is all I can get. Dang. Man. I would have thought for a whole lot better. But I guess right now it's set up for an excellent position of this whole conversation about all the days and stuff going on. So let me just see if I can turn the background music down a little bit more so that it becomes more background music, and let's just operate within this parameter of me being live, sitting in the kitchen. I have to change the name of this show altogether, and the background music playing. But on the air, I can't tell if it's being affected by the trimmer, the absence of warp speed, or is that its natural behavior of its electronics, automatic action going down.
Someday some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me high and dry. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're gentle and wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, oh,
All right, so today we're going to begin with this book, just to correlate, the information, get another source, kind of saying the same thing. And little by little, we pull the babies out of all these books. You know, this book's called Phoenician Origin of Britons, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons by L.A. Waddell. This is another book I had, saved up for the last 4 years. And shout out to Big Judah. Yeah, there's a time for everything, so we got to gain a full understanding, because I could just read these books, just to make videos, but it wouldn't have meant nothing to me if I didn't know what I was reading. So I think that we're all at a point where we can, we know the history of America, and we can start going into other lands and stuff, and other peoples and nations. And I like history in general. It's not just about ancient American history. I like history in general. It always interests me. So again, this some great drop in this book. We're going to actually get into this book a lot more in future videos, right? Because we're getting into all this, right? And remember, so-called Phoenicians, right? The sea people, and we've correlated a lot of the time that a lot of that these Phoenicians most likely were coming from ancient America, or Canaan, the real Canaan, because that's what it says biblically, right? They were coming out of Canaan. Canaan was in America, the promised land, right? Great drop. We're going to go to a specific chapter in this book that correlates with what we're learning. So again, this is the Phoenician origin of Britain, Scots, and Anglo-Saxons, discovered by Phoenician and Sumerian inscriptions in Britain, by pre-Roman Britain coins, and mass of new history. All right, again, what? Sumerian, the Shinar, remember where was Shinar? Europe, British Isles. Chaldea being Ireland, the capital, the city Ur. All right, you see what they're finding here? This is again by L.A. Waddell. He's a fellow of a Royal Anthropological Institute, Linnean and Folklore Societies, honorable correspondent, Indian Archaeological Survey, ex-professor of Tibetan and London University. All right. And the thing is, we don't go off just one person. You got to understand that these people have sources. So you're talking about, well, you're not going to believe this guy. It's not about believing this guy. He has sources. You have footnotes. Go verify the sources. All right. This was written in 1924. Just want to show you this image, which is almost right in the beginning of this book. And it says here, Aryan Phoenician inscriptions, just like we read in the last video, right, in that book Ur of Chaldees, how I was saying that it seems that all these languages go back to at least two specific main languages, which was Aryan and Semitic, right, or Shemitic. Semitic, Aryan, Phoenician. Phoenician is Paleo-Hebrew, which is Shemitic. Inscriptions on Newton stone of part Tolon, king of the Scots, about 400 BC, calling himself Briton, Hittite, and Phoenician. All right, that's there. That's right there. You see, that's historical, archaeological. That's there. You can't explain that away. All right, so we're going to be reading from chapter 12 of this book. All right, again, we skipped a lot of chapters. We're going to go into all those chapters most likely. A lot of good drop. This is what's correlating with us. And just want to show you what it says here. It says, who were the Celts, properly so-called? Disclose an identity of early British Celts or Celts and Culdees or Chuldees with the Chaldees of Van and the Picts. Now Chaldees, right? Chaldees switch to the K for a C, you got Chaldees too, or you can say Chaldees, right? Like Ur of the Chaldees. Celts are called Chaldees or Chaldees. But before we go into chapter 12, on the previous chapter, just said something at the end, which was going into this chapter. I just want to read that. It says here, and this is talking about Picts arriving in Albion and Stone Age, right? So the Picts, right? Who was the ancient Picts of Scotland? It says in Cornwall, the prehistoric worlds of pierced stone called pixies, grindstones, and presumably amulets are also called snake stones. This serpent cult character of the Picts, the serpent, right? The serpents would explain the prevalence of human sacrifice amongst the Druid priests of the Aborigines who were of this lunar matriarch's cult. All right, so dodge the hijack. And also the historical notices of the existence of cannibalism amongst the barbarian tribes of Caledonia, the Chaledonians or Caledonians, as late as the time of Saint Jerome, 4th century AD, as well as the traditional immolation of a victim by Saint Columba, and founding his first church at Iona for the Culdees or Picts. Culdees? So the Picts were called Culdees. Add an H right here between the C and the U, you get Chuldees or Chaldees, right? All right, am I reaching? Let's see. It thus transpires by the new evidence that the Picts were the primitive, small-statured, prehistoric aborigines of Albion or Britain with a riverbed type of skulls. They were presumably a branch of the primitive, small-statured, narrow-browed, and long-headed dark race of matriarchous serpent-worshipping cave dwellers of the Van Lake region, the Van, Biani, Fen, or Chaldees, or primitive Chaldees. You see that? Primitive Chaldees, the Chaldean people, who? The Celts, these Picts. We're not even the Celts yet, but these Picts, a part of them, a dark race. Remember what source we're in, right? We weren't expecting this, but they're letting us know. These so-called indigenous, aboriginal, prehistoric people, right, were a dark race of matriarchies, serpent worshiping, they call it, dodge the hijack. But they were a primitive Chaldees, Chaldees or Chaleds or Caledons, Chaldean, Chaldees, or of the Chaldees. Again, you know, we're reading this book, Ireland, or of the Chaldees, which we're going to get into some more chapters later on. All right, let's go back. Chaldees and the Chaldees or Chaldees, as you can see here. Chaldees, right? Chaldees, Chalets, or Caledons, who in early prehistoric times in the Old Stone Age sent off from this central hive swarm after swarm of hunger marchers under matriarchs westward across Asia Minor to Europe, as far as Iberia in the Biscay region after the retreating ice. All right, so this is their story. What was interesting, you know, when I was reading that is how they literally just said Chaldees, right? And they're talking about these Picts, the Chaldees. All right, so again, this is chapter 12. Who were the Celts, properly so-called? The Chaldees, the Culdees, Chaldees, remember? And the Picts. It says here, rightly to elicit the real racial agency by which uncivilized ancient Britain became Aryanized in language, high culture, and civilized institutions in the pre-Roman period, it is still necessary for us to re-examine and strive to solve the vexed question of the Celts. For the existing confusion in the use of this term forms one of the greatest obstacles to clear thinking on the subject as cited in the heading, and this gross confusion has been a chief cause by the delay hitherto in solving the origin of the Britons and the Aryan question in Britain. At the outset, we are confronted by the paradox that while philologists and popular generally in this country assume that the Celts were Aryans in race as well as in language, and were the parents of the Britons or Britons and the Scots and Irish, notwithstanding that the early Britons are also called non-Aryan, pre-Celtic aborigines. On the other hand, scientific anthropologists and classic historians have proved that the Celts of history were non-Aryan, round-headed, darkish, small-statured race, all right? Dark, swarthy-eyed, of South Germany and Switzerland, and that the Celts properly so-called are totally like it in the British Isles. So they got that from this one guy, right? Check the footnote. Thus, to speak, as is so commonly done, of Celtic ancestry, the Celtic temperament and Celtic fire amongst any section of the natives of these islands is, according to anthropologists, merely imaginary. The term Celt or Celt is entirely unknown as the designation of any race or racial element or language in the British Isles, all right? Pay attention to that. Until arbitrarily introduced there a few generations ago. They just introduced these words. Nor does the name even exist in the so-called Celtic languages, the Gaelic, Welsh, and Irish. It is, on the contrary, the classic Greek and Latin title of a totally different race, of a totally different physical type from that of the British Isles. All right, you see that? They're saying that the Greeks and Latin actually is the ones that use that word and actually named that to a different type of people, not the same original people we're talking about. And that word was only introduced there by unscientific philologists and ethnologists some decades ago. The Celts or Celts first appear in history under that name in the pages of Herodotus, right, by the Greeks. They're saying 480 to 408 BC. He calls them Celtoi and locates them on the continent of Western Europe. He says, for the Eastern Danube, beginning from the Celtoi, divides Europe in its course, but the Celtoi of Gaul are beyond the Pillars of Hercules and border on the territories of the Cunesi Oi or the Cunet Oi, supposed to be Finisterre, who lived the furthest to the west of all the peoples of Europe. Strabo, writing in a few decades after Caesar's epic, gives further details regarding the ancient Greek formation on the Celts, whom he calls Celtai. He says, the ancient Greeks, afterwards becoming acquainted with those natives towards the west, styled them Celtai, Celts, and Iberian or Iberians, right? Iberians, sometimes compounding the names into Celti-Iberian or Celti-Iberian or Celto-Scythian, thus ignorantly uniting various distinct nations. You see, they were grouping mad people together, is what letting you know that these Greeks and Latins were actually doing. So that's why there is some confusion as who the Celts or Celts were. Again, the original people never called themselves that. It's not even part of their language. It says no true Celts in British Isles. It says, continues, says Strabo habitually uses the term Celtica or land of the Celts for Gaul, which corresponded generally to modern France, including Switzerland, and defines it as thus. So Strabo says Celtica is bounded on the southwest by the mountains of the Pyrenees of southern France, which extended to either sea, both the Mediterranean and the ocean, on the east by the Rhine, on the north by the ocean from the northwestern extremity of the Pyrenees to the mouth of the Rhine, on the south by the Sea of Marseilles, and by the Alps from Liguria, Genoa, to the sources of the Rhine. He excludes Iberia or Spain, Portugal from Celtica, noting that Pyrenees chain divides Celtica from Iberia. But he adds, a forest extends the size of Celtica too far, including within it what we would designate as Iberia, as far as Gates, Genoa, and Piedmont on the Italian side of the Alps, whose people, he says, were named by the Greeks Celto-Liguus or Celto-Ligurian. It is also noteworthy that he calls the inhabitants of Celtica or Gaul not only Celtai, but also them and their land repeatedly Galatic, or variants of Galatia, Celt, and he includes the Belgi as Celts. But Strabo, like Caesar and all other Greco-Roman writers, without exception, expressly excludes Britain from Celtica, or the land of the Celts. Thus he writes, it's Britain's longest side lies parallel to Celtica, Gaul, and he emphasizes the difference between the physical appearance of the inhabitants of Britain and the Celts or Celts of Gaul, describing the latter, the Celts, as a short-statured race with light yellow hair. Remember, the short-statured race was dark, even though they had light yellow hair. They were dark-skinned. Just like picture the Southeast Malaysians, right? Caesar also, in the well-known opening paragraph in his commentaries, whilst affirming the identity of the Celtae or Celts with the Galli or Gauls, restricts the title Celt to Mid-Gaul west of the Seine, that is to Old Brittany, with Armorica, the lower valley in Switzerland. He says, all Gaul, or Galia, is divided into three parts, one of which the Belgi inhabit, the Aquitani, another, those who in their own language are called Celts or Celtae, and ours Gauls or Galli, the third. And neither Caesar nor Tacitus nor any other of the Greeks or Roman historians or writers ever referred to the Celts or Celts as inhabitants of Britain or of Hibernia. All right, you hear that? In British history and literature, the first mention of Celts appears to be in 1607 in an incidental reference to the Celts not in Britain but in France, and again in 1656 in Blunt's Glossography, which defines Celt, one born in Gaul, and again in 1782 contrasting the British with the Celts in Gaul in the sentence, the obstinate war between the insular Britons and the continental Celts. But all of these references are unequivocally to the Celts in France and not in Britain. The older philologists were thus mainly responsible for this arbitrary extension of the name Celtic in a racial sense to the earlier inhabitants of the Isles. The confusion arose through the popular misconception that because a people spoke a dialect of the same group of languages, they were necessarily of the same race. The confusion began with the observation by the French philologists that the language of the Celts in Brittany, or Mid-Gaul or Celtic speech, as it was naturally called by them, was essentially similar in structure to that of the Brittonic or Cymri speech of the Welsh, the Cymri, right? The Gomori, the Cymri, Cimmerians, right? To that of the Brittonic or Cymri speech of the Welsh in the Britain of Brittany and Gaul. This Brittonic language was then presumed to be a branch of the Celtic of Gaul, and the term Celtic applied to it. All right, so you hear how they were mixing all this stuff. We got a little confused, like, and that they're talking about that video we made about the Sumerians and how they were related to some of the Gaul and Celtics, and this is one way they were mixing languages, and people were speaking their language, and so they were mixing their race with them. A lot of them weren't really Sumeri; they were just really speaking Celtic dialects, so they were all being put under Celt. Because these Brittonic languages, these ancient Britons, right? Again, it says here, was then presumed to be a branch of the Celtic or Gaul, and the term Celtic applied to it, and then extended in a racial sense to the Welsh people who spoke it. Similarly, the Gaelic or Gaelic speech of the Irish and the Scottish Highlanders was also found to have affinity with the Gaelic and Welsh, or Celtic in parentheses, and all the people speaking those languages were also dubbed Celts. You hear what they're pointing out here, which is something I'm understanding now. All right, so I'm glad I read this. All right, a lot of there was an ancient language there that got confused with Celtic. Because these people spoke this language, they were considered Celts, but they weren't really Celts. Remember, that word is not even part of their language. Summer, so many different nations, you know, so they had different names. They didn't call themselves that. The linguistic affinities on which this racial kinship was assumed were tabulated in two groups by Dr. Latham in 1841, based on the classification by Pritchard and C. Mayer, and this still remains the recognized classification of the Celtic dialects, of which the Gaelic is considered to be the more primitive and older, right? So the Gaelic is the oldest of the supposed Celtic dialects. Again, and they're letting us know right here in this chapter that they actually grabbed that old Gaelic and they named it or dubbed it Celtic, and it really wasn't. So right here it gives us a table. It says Celtic group of languages. It says 1 and 2, so Gaelic or Cymric, and then Gaelic or Erse. So we got the Cymric or Welsh, number 2 Cornish, now extend, and then 3 Armorican or Breton, Celtic proper. Then over here, and it says under the Gaelic or Erse is the Fenwic or Erse or Irish, and then number 2 Gaelic or Highland Scottish. We're going to get into all these nations and languages, try to understand it a lot better. So continuing, it says, still further had the Celtic theory grown apace, The so-called Celtic race was also called Aryan in race. When it was observed that their language was akin to the languages which had latterly been classed as Aryan, this essentially racial title of Aryan had been introduced into English and other European languages by the discovery in 1794 by the erudite Sir William Jones, the Chief Justice of Calcutta, that the Sanskrit language of the ancient Hindus who called themselves Arya was radically and structurally of the same type as the old Persian, Greek, Latin, Celtic, English, and German or Teutonic languages of Europe, and that the culture and mythology of the ancient Hindus were essentially analogous to that ancient Greece and Rome and of the gods. Goths. All right, so remember the Persians descend from Elam, or they're Elamites, right? Elam was the son of Shem. Remember the table, all right? We're still talking about the same people. What is a Greek so called, right? So who are these people and where do they descend from? Now, continuing, now they're trying to make correlations with the ancient Hindus. Who are the ancient Hindus but the Nagas, right? The two ancient Nagas, who are the Nagas, the ancient Hindus, right? Who also, right, snake people supposedly. And remember earlier they were talking about snake worshiping people over here. All right, you see all the correlation. It says the physical appearance also of the pure Hindus was essentially analogous to that of the ancient Greeks, and that the culture and mythology of the ancient Hindus were essentially analogous to that of the ancient Greeks. disproved their accepted theory that Celts of Gaul were of the same kindred of the Celts of the British Isles, right? They're different people. You hear this? You guys understanding? And that both were Aryans, and they're supposed to be both Aryans. Whereas it was now disclosed on the contrary that they were of different races, and that they neither were of the Aryan race, although both spoke an Aryan language in different dialects. These scientific results were fully confirmed by further measurements, which were also extended over the greater part of Europe, as these measurements disentangle the British Celts from the continental and also sharply differentiate the Aryan type from both. It is necessary to glance at their leading results, which are here displayed in the accompanying table and illustrated in figure 22. All right, it says here racial types in Europe. Real quick, it says this shows three main racial types in the population of modern Europe, all three of which we shall find represented in Britain, namely the Aryan or Nordic or Northern, tall, fair, browed, long or longish heads. When they say fair, you gotta also be careful and not think just white, Alpine or Celtic. Continental is number 2, or Germanic. And then short statured, fair or darkish browed, brown, round or broad hair, that's them. And then 3 is Iberian or Mediterranean, shortish stature, dark, narrow browed, long face, long heads, and including the prehistoric riverbed type of the Picts. The best of the distinguishing criterions of race is the head index and second column of table in conjunction with color. All right. So, we got to dodge the hijack when we're talking about this craniology, because it was based on trying to make people less intelligent than others, So, but either way, they're showing you this can't really determine skin complexion either. They just know, they can't say the Aryans are fair or white. That's conjecture. The first of these racial types of Europe, the Nordic or Northern, which is the Aryan type, is now mostly restricted to Northern Western Europe. It included most of the classic Greeks and Romans, as evidenced by their sculptures and paintings and skeletal remains. It comprises a considerable element in the present-day population in the British Isles, the Scandinavians or Norsemen, including Swedes and many Danes, and a small proportion of the people of France and the Rhine Valley, where, however, the skulls of the older burials show that the civilizers of Germany, like the Jutes, and the Anglo-Saxons were of this type. And I shall show that the early Britons and Scots, properly so called, as well as the Goths, belonged to this Aryan type, which was also the type of Eastern or Indo-Persian branch of the Aryans, the Barat Katiya, and the Kati, or Hittites and Phoenicians. All right, you see what he's letting you know. The second of the Celtic or so-called Alpine Swiss, extending from Brittany to Switzerland, also comprised a major type in the Rhine Valley, and the Slav or Serb people of mid-Europe, including 2 Prussians, Poles, and a large proportion of the Russians. Remember, these are dark-skinned people. And an appreciable element amongst the people of the east coast of Britain derived from the Bronze Age, Hun invaders of prehistoric Alban in the later Stone Age, who were essentially of this round-headed type. The third type is of essential interest in regard to the British Celtic question and the dark racial element by which the Celtic language is chiefly spoken in the British Isles. This type is generally known as Iberian, from one of its old seats, Iberia or Spain, and it was given the wider synonym of Pelasgic, but it is now generally called Mediterranean, after Sergi's nomenclature, as it is found in modern Europe, mainly along the sea basin from Spain to Greece and its archipelago to Asia Minor. It is essentially of the same type as the prehistoric Stone Age inhabitants of the British Isles and the riverbed type of Huxley, and it's also substantially the same type which is found in many of the long barrows or long grave mounds alongside the Aryan type there. And it still forms a substratum of the modern head form in the British Isles. It thus appears that the titles Hibernia for Ireland and Hebrides, all right, Eber and Hebrides, Hebrews, Ireland for Ireland, Hibernia, Eber, Ireland for the Western Isles are probably survivals of the Iberia, title for the primitive stock with which first peopled the British Isles in the Stone Age. Indeed, the Irish Gaels or Gaels or Fini claim origin from the sons of Milead or Miled, which is said to be Malaysia and Spain, Iberia, and in describing the later colonization of Erin, they say that a leading chief of the later Gaed Hel Miled immigrants was called Eber, which appears to preserve this Iberian title, Eber of the Hebrews, right? Remember, Eber is feather, it goes down to pinion, Ibra. They spread themselves through Erin to her coast, Eber. The god Hel took the south of Erin, or Erin. In consequence of these discoveries by anthropologists that the Celts belonged to the non-Aryan round-headed race and the resultant paradox that the so-called British and Irish Celts were not Celts, Celtic, their whole stories and legends and all these people, like when we say Celtic, remember the last chapter, the last book we read. We're talking about these ancient people of Scotland and the British Isles, Ireland. All right, their whole history, their whole mythology, their whole tradition goes back to Noah. All right, there was no particular and enduring distinction between him and the Celt. Ancient Britain and Ireland, we assume to have been places of sojourn of Noah and his sons. Therefore, the religion of the Hebrews may reasonably be expected to have been the same as that of the Druids. Remember, it's not about religions, all right? There are to the present day families of the name of Noah to be found in England. Of course, some might say this is no uninterrupted inheritance of the name, only a coincidence to be explained by many causes other than a distinct Noahic source. But it is quite probable because the Hebrews and the Celts were once the same. Again, because the Hebrews and the Celts were once the same. I remember, sons of Shem, that the name has remained here. The name Hugh, or Hugh, as it is now spelled, right? You see that last name Hugh, where it comes from? Comes from Noah. According to the Welsh, the other names for Noah is to be counted by thousands in the three kingdoms. No one is bold enough to affirm that this name is a foreign importation, Roman, Danish, or Saxon. The name is to be found as Hugh, or Hughes, up Hugh, Makhua, and Pew. Says here, section 1, Japhet. Now it says, the seven sons of Japhet, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, and Dodanam are traced by Josephus into Europe. He shows that their habitations were situated as follows. Beginning at the mountains Taurus and Amanus, they proceeded along Asia as far as the river Tanais and along Europe to Cadiz, and settling themselves on the lands which they light upon, which none had inhabited before, they called the nations by their own names. For Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now call Galatians or Gauls. Now remember, these were the Simri, and remember, it's not the same. These Gauls or Galatians are not the same as the ancient, but we just read in the last book, so let's not get confused again. But at least we got a reference now of who the Sumerians mixed with and how they became known as Gauls. You know, so remember, I have a video on this, very thorough video actually, on the descendants of Japhet, and specifying the Sumerians too. And that's part 2 of my Nations of the World series. So go ahead and check that out if you haven't. All right. It says Magog founded those that from him were named Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians. All right. So we got to dash the hijack. Now, as to Javan and Madai, the sons of Japhet, from Madai came the Chaldeans, who are called Medes by the Greeks, but from Javan, Ionia, and all the Grecians are derived. Tobel founded the Tobelites, who are now called Iberes, and the Moshosheni were founded by Moshok. Now they are Cappadocians. Of the 3 sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz founded the Ashkenazians. I remember Ashkenaz. That's the time about the Ashkenazis. The Ashkenaz founded the Ashkenazis. Right? They're Japhet, right? They're not from Shem. The Ashkenazi, who are now called by the Greeks Reginians or Reginians. So did Ripav found the Riphians, now called Pathologians, right? Same people of these Ashkenazis, all right? And Trugrama and the Trugramians, who as the Greeks resolved were named Phrygians. Of the 3 sons of Javan, also the son of Japhet, Elisha gave name to the Elysians, who were his subjects. They are now the Aeolians, Tarsus to the Tarsians, for so was Cilicia of old called, the sign of which is that the noblest city they have, and a metropolis also is Tarsus, the Tau, being by change put the Theta. Because this account seems to us to reconcile with truth a good deal of what we have advanced in support of the names of places and people mentioned in the Old Testament being traceable through Europe, so we will leave it without comment, did it not, in our opinion, require to be viewed with the caution that comes of what we conceive to be more correct. The sons of Shem and Ham were with the sons of Japhet, or before, or shortly after them, in Europe, whence they in part entered Asia. More of this after. If Japhet was, as we cannot doubt, the elder son of Noah, his family may be taken to be the oldest in the world. So the Celtic or Irish or Cymric language, which could not then have changed much, and the manners, customs, and the antiquities of Europe are the oldest in the world. I remember the Cymric and ancient pigs, they're not the same people. Because they, again, we read in the last book that the pigs were eventually grouped as Celts, right? And they became known as Celts, and they got grouped with these Cymri that invaded, that came in much later. All right, so they're not the same people when they're talking about them here. The most ancient Greek and Roman writers agree to allow the Celts or Cymri or Gomerati to have been the primogenital family. But they are right about these people being very old. And again, My Nations of the World Part 2 goes heavy into them. They're the same as the Sumerians, but they're not the same as the ancient Picts, not the same as the ancient British or Irish people. So they wouldn't be the same people here. South of the Caucasian range, we find that the Cymri were called Gomrai. So it may be that the name Crimea is a corruption of the word Cymri. It is alleged by some that this section of the Cymri allied themselves with the children of Madai and became the Medes of history, and that another portion of them, separating from the main body, became Parthians, who in process of time became the Parthians or later Persians. I remember Persians, now they're saying in part because they don't sure, but they're a little bit sure because they did mix with these people. So the Persians were originally Elamites from Elam. Elam was the son of Shem, and these people did mix in with these Parthians or Cymri or Gomarians, all right? And then they became as a people together Persians, but it was originally Elamites, all right? Found and it started with Elam, the son of Shem. Another division of these people moving along the chain of the Apennines became the Cimbri or Humbri or Umbri of Italy. These were the main stock which the Roman Confederacy was formed, made up of Latin, Sanid, Sabine, Marcian, and other nations. The Saturnian or Golden Age was during the Umbrian Empire of Italy, 1200 BC. The patriarchs of Umbria, both regal and priestly, became the gods of Roman mythology. The termination of words in Celtic and Latin differ, but it is curious how the root forms of the Latin are discoverable to be Celtic. The proper names of the oldest Latin families are formed on the Celtic basis, thus Claudius, Catulus, Cato, Pompeius, Lucullus, Camillus, Marcus, and the sewers of the Umbrian Rome and the Cyclopean fortresses and the temples were erected by Umbrian kings. The religion of the Umbrians was the Druidical or Patriarchal. The Tuscan or Etrurian Empire followed and was composed of the same Celtic element. The Etrurian may be said to have given way to the Gaelic interruptions of Brennus and Belinus. From the very earliest times, the country of the descendants of Gomer was known as Galatia, for Gomer founded those whom the Greeks now Josephus' time called Galatians or Gauls. The most remarkable portion of the Galatia alluded to by Josephus were Caledonia or Galadonia in Gaul and the province of Galatia in Spain. The Welsh of the present day pride themselves upon being sons of Gomer. There are many families of the names in England, but they are chiefly to be found in Wales. Again, remember, they're mixing a lot of these nations. They did end up going to Europe, the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland, these Cymri, descendants of Gomer. They did end up assimilating and bringing their religion and languages and beliefs and all their history into the Picts' land and absorbing them and making them, basically go extinct from history, not as a people, but almost like a paper genocide back then. They invaded them, they made them, take on all their languages. That's why, again, it was good to read the book we read before. All right, so again, I'm glad I read that book before. I have a little more better understanding how a Cymri, a Sumerian, a Japhet could be considered these Gauls or Celts, and that had me confused when I did that video. I knew there was more mixture in there. I just knew it. There was more mixture. It wasn't just clearly them, and I knew they had assimilated with other people to become the Celts and Gauls, and this is a clear example. I'm glad we got that perspective kind of cleared up a little bit. We're actually going to go more into that, definitely. Now I was going to talk about the descendants of Magog. So again, that was the Gomer descendants. So we're going to talk about Magog. It says it is not only general valency that makes allusion to the Irish being descendants of Magog. There's frequent mention made of this fact in the history of traditions of Ireland. Magog, or sons of the north, as his name signifies, as in many scriptures references associated with the Isles of the sea. Now, Javan, another son of Japhet, is Javan. The Ja modified into E in Welsh, the name becomes Even or Evans, one of the most numerous family names in Wales. All right, you see that? Ashkenaz, this Galatian son of Gomer, has been traced to Germany. Ascanians, all right, so that was one of the groups, right? One of the Celtic groups that were breaking down from Germany, Switzerland. They had a different type of skull that was different than the actual pigs, right? So remember, these are different people, even though eventually they assimilated together and the pigs had to be called or take on their customs and be called Celts and all this other stuff. All right, so Ashkenaz, again, the Galatian son of Gomer, has been traced to Germany. Ascanians, the ancient Germans, were called and known as such by the Saxons. Askinis or Ashkenes is yet a proper name in Germany. It says Ripath, this other son of Gomer, like Javan or Ivan, seems to have bequeathed his name nearly in an altered form to the present Griffith of Wales. Togama, the people of Togama and his bands, invariably associated with Gog and Magog, are the people of the northern quarters, Scandinavia, and particularly Russia. All right, it says Eliza. Eliza was the son of Javan. Josephus says he gave name to the Elysians who were his subjects. They became the Aeolians. The Eleusinian mysteries originated with the sons of Elisa. To turn to the name as it is found in the British Islands, there are people called Elisa, or as the Welsh give it, Elias. Hence the names Ellis, Ellison, and Elisa and Elias were favorite names with the Hebrews, as may be seen in 1 Kings, it says here, chapter 22:6 and chapter 19:16, in Ezekiel 22:7. There is mention made of the Isles of Eliza. It says Tarshish, another son of Javan, was Tarshish, that the portion of Iberia, Spain, called Tarshish was named from his son of Javan, Josephus, as we have shown believes. When Josephus wrote, Tarshish must have been, from his remarks, a place of some note, but the Bible references to it prove this. Silver spread into plates is brought into Tarshish. Tarshish was thy merchant with iron. Ezekiel, the ships of Tarshish shall sing of thee, Tyre, in thy market. Ezekiel 27, 25. And Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish. This is Jonah 1:3. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was not accounted of in the days of Solomon, for the king had a sea of navy of Tarshish. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. This is in 1 Kings 10, 21, and 22. Now we go into Dodana. That's another son. It says, this, the last son of Javan and a Galatian, seems not to have left his name so as to be clearly discerned in these times. Nevertheless, it is capable of fair interpretation. Isaiah says, OG traveling companies of Dedanim. This is in Isaiah 21:13, with evident reference to a nomad but yet semi-civilized people who several centuries before this settled in Ireland, called the Tuat de Danann. All right, that sounds almost like the tribe of Dan. So they're like mixing a lot of these Danites, most likely with the sons of Gomer, and that did happen. All right, the sons of Japhet, as we have shown, are constantly referred to in the prophets as the inhabitants of the Isles. And in Genesis 5:10, we find, by these were the Isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. All right, so we continue in the book Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes from 1873. And we're in chapter 8. In chapter 8 says, the sons of Ham and his descendants in Western Europe, prophecy against the Isles, and retrospect of Habakkuk. All right. So again, we touched the hijack and we get the babies out. All right. It says the evidence that the children of Noah dwelled together before the division of the time of Peleg is sufficient to warrant our looking for traces of this son of Noah in the country of Gomer's posterity. Ham is described as the father of Canaan. The word Ham, which abounds in the British Isles in the name of localities and families, almost identifies the Isles of the Sea as a portion of the Hamath of Isaiah. The city of Hamona in the valley of Hamon, Gog, with which it is mentioned in Ezekiel 39, was situated in these islands. The word Gog is associated with places in Britain. Hamon Gog, interpreted through the Welsh, means literally Northampton. Gog means north, and Ham bears its own signification. According to some of the old maps, an example of which is appended to Dr. Skeen's edition of the 4 ancient books of Wales, Prydian y Gogledd means the northern division of Britain. The north of England, including the lowlands of Scotland, was at one time in possession of the Welsh, which may account for this distinction being preserved. Northmen are called Gogledd, or the men of the north, so the Norwegian Norsemen and the Norman, the latter name being given to the men of the north of France, who went there under Royal the Dane. In some parts of England, the word Ham is yet preserved by itself, Ham, in Glamorganshire and East and West Ham, near London. Again, we have North and South Hampton, Hampstead in Staffordshire, Hampton near London, and names of people, Ham, Hampson, Hammond, Hammond, Hamish, and perhaps Hamilton. Ham was the father of Canaan. A place derived of this name is Cana, one of the islands of the Hebrides, perhaps the Canaan of Ezekiel 28:23, mentioned in connection with Eden and Haram. Cain Mar, a mountain in North Wales, seems also to have retained name. As to the names of people, there are many: Cain, Keen, Keen, Cain, 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 Du, Cain, and Khan. The son of Canaan was Cush. There are some who believe that there are traces of Cush in Ireland. The supposed Cushite remains there are considered by antiquaries to be of great importance towards the elucidation of great prehistoric people. Cushandal and Cushenden, both in Ireland, are with Midian or Madian spoken of in Habakkuk 3:7, and they are to be identified as the Cushan and Midian of Habakkuk. Cushandal is in the neighborhood of the Akkads, all right? The Akkads or the Akkadians, Acadia. The old name for Meath, according to Irish authorities, was Midhi or Midian. Cushandal is situated near Meath, but may not have been a part of the old Meath province of Ireland. Timon, Timora, may also have been situated there. Timora, Tamari. In connection with Cush, we now refer more generally to Ireland. Inspirational utterances in the forms of visions of the past, as well as prophecies, distinguish Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Habakkuk. Their prophecies were not more remarkable than their retrospections. The words of Habakkuk 3:2-7 are an example of retrospect. The prophecies against the idols had been fulfilled, and he sublimely says, God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his hands, and there was the hiding of his power. Before him went the pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Was the Lord displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea, that thou didst ride upon thine horses and thy chariots of salvation? Thy bow was made quite naked, according to the oaths of the tribes, even thy words, Selah. Though this cleave the earth with rivers, the mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice and lifted up his hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of the thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. We have quoted Habakkuk to this length because there is much more in his words than the sublime. Geologists speak of disturbed formations, for they find the primitive rock uppermost, and the great mystery of the formation of the Irish bog has never yet been solved. Vast deposits miles in extent of dark vegetable and animal matter, containing forests of oak and other trees with burnt, charred roots, many in a horizontal position, would seem to tell of the fire of the Lord and remind us of the burning coals that went forth at his feet. Strange bones of men and animals, oak canoes, jewels bearing strange characters, gold and silver ornaments in great quantity are found in these deposits and assure us of a great earthquake having occurred there. The lows, the mountains, the great caves of which Fingal is but one, tell us of a convulsion which the scripture records thread over and over again. The Bible reminds us of several earthquakes. One of the most remarkable is that which was in the 27th year of Isaiah, king of Judah, says here BC 787. That's the hijack. Zechariah and Amos speak of it. It is recorded in the annals of Ulster that an earthquake at one time overthrew over 56 of the round towers, drove asunder the nation, says Habakkuk. May it not be that the allusion here is to the British Islands cut from the continent of Europe? Look at the map of Europe, and while remembering the kindred races of the French, Spanish, Old British, Welsh, Irish, and Erse, and the antiquities of each, it is impossible but to be struck with the words of the prophet. Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea? These are words that follow the description of Cushan and affliction, and the trembling of the land of Midian. Who can say that they were not intended to describe the separation of Great Britain and Ireland from the mainland of the continent by the interposition of river and sea? All right, so that's a deep one. They're like, why did they talking about that, huh? Think about that. It says, Alaphone, the son of Brilaeus, was a very kind king in word and action, and also a bard of transcendent compositions. A tremendous earthquake occurred in his time, until the mountains and rocks were rent, and the rivers, being diverted from their beds, ran through the chasms of the ground. This is a paragraph from the Iolo manuscript, and the note upon the earthquake mentioned in it is subjoined. Cambro British traditionary records commemorate many violent convulsions of the earth that seem to have occurred too far back in antiquity to admit of any chronological computation of their real periods. Still other testimonies aided by natural appearances and geological comparisons frequently tend to verify those immemorial events. Druidical mythology, Welsh Prize essay on the Coelbren, page 7, says that the Almighty, when neither life nor being existed, save himself, vocalized his name, and consequently that all animated nature sprang simultaneously to light and life at the ineffably melodious sound, thus transmitting to futurity a magnificent reference to the creation. The awful bursting of the lake of floods that deluged the world and drowned all living things except Dwi Fan and Dwi Fak, the man and woman of God, who escaped in the bald ship and by their offspring repeopled the world, is another recorded tradition of the deluge. All right, that's an Irish mythology in Druid, right? Which is sustained by an additional Celtic version of the event that probably pertained to the aborigines of the island. For among the three arduous works of the island of Britain is named the ship of Nephid, Lord of Lords, that carried in it a male and female of every living creature. When the lake of floods burst, the mighty occurrences thus recorded would probably have only been retained as the imaginings of erratic genius Were they not elucidated by the Mosaic accounts independently of the mythologies and varied forms of perhaps all other nations, kindreds, and tongues of the earth, in nearer association with the effects of the earthquake attributed in the text to this reign, may be quoted the 67th triad, the three subordinate islands of the islands of Britain, the Isle of Orkney, the Isle of Man, and the Isle of Wight, or White. Afterwards, the land was so rent by the sea that Mont Anglesey became an island, and in the same manner Orkney was rent into a multitude of islands, and other parts of Alban or Scotland and Cambria became islands. The testimony of this triad is supported by Mark the Hermit's copy of Ninnius, where the following passage occurs: Tres magnas insulas habet quarumuna australis. All right, so that's Latin. Now let's get to the English. It says, Britain, has three great islands, one toward the south, opposite the Armorican shore, called White, or Wit, the second situated mid-sea between Ireland and Britain, called Eubonia or Man, and the third to the extreme north of the British boundary beyond the Picts, named Orkney. An ancient proverb quoted by the same venerable author as applicable to the rule of the paramount monarchs of the island affords further corroboration. Judicavit Britanniam contribus insulus. He ruled over Britain and its three islands. From the construction of the foregoing triad, it is pretty clear that a later clause is merely a commentary appended by some remote transcriber to account for the altered appearance of the Orkneys after the rupture. And we may fairly conclude also that the triads were among the ancient traditions and ancient books from which Ninnius professes to have drawn his information ex traditione veterum, ex antiquis libris nostrorum. The third triad of the Hamguit series gives like the facsimile prefix to Gunn's translation of the Historia 28 as the number of ancient British cities. Although some of the names vary in these records, different copies, however, have extended the number of 33 and 35. The extraordinary bed of the Avon from the Bristol to the Severn is evidently as an immense cleft formed by some tremendous convulsion and Caer Ordinant, the city of the river. The Welsh name of that ancient city seems to support the hypothesis. All right, so they're talking about how all this evidence of something big happening there. All right. Whether this rupture was produced by an earthquake, similar to that recorded in the text, or by volcanic eruption, cannot now be determined further than that the agency of the latter may be rationally inferred from the proximity of Brandon Hill to it. I am informed by persons who have examined the district that the original course of the Avon through the Somersetshire from Nailsea near Bristol to its confluence with the Severn at Clevedon may still be traced. The above is appended to the genealogy of Eanstein, the son of Gwargan, Prince of Glamorgan, together with a short account of the accomplishments and achievements of the several princes. It includes the Iolo manuscripts, pages 340 to 341. Now it says here, the Psalms, as well as the books of the prophets, are full of allusions to this great convulsion accompanied by fire, a great shaking in the land of Israel. And the fire of the Lord may be understood as the disturbed formations, volcanic actions, and of modern geologists. The Quran refers to the inhabitants of the wood near Midian as having been destroyed, and of lofty towers that were thrown down. Oh, all right, you hear that? The Median referred to is to be distinguished from the Median by the Red Sea, which we first hear of as an existence in the time of Abraham, right? So that's over there in the Gulf of California, right? The true Red Sea. Most likely named after Midian, the son of Keturah. Midian, as we understand it, was the land of the Midianite merchantmen who carried tin from Cornwall to Phoenicia and to other parts of the east. These Midianites, in company with Ishmaelites, the Midianites in company with Ishmaelites are described in Genesis 37, 25 to 28 as coming from Gilead with their camels. All right, Gilead, Utah, is that in Utah with their camels? All right, America, that's where camels originated in North America. Did you know that? We've proven that. Just Google it right now. and barren spicery, and balm and myrrh to Egypt. What Egypt? Mississippi? What you talking about? Little Egypt? Probably influenced to do so from the family relationship that existed between them. For the brothers of Cush were Mizraim, all right, Mizraim, Menes, Phut, or Phut, and Canaan. Egypt was the land of Mizraim, and Phut and Canaan are considered to have been nearly intermediate places. The supposed Cushite remains at Cashel bear striking resemblance to some of the Ninevite sculptures, Nergal or Nimrod, the winged lion, exhibited in the British Museum, is a remarkable imitation of the winged lion of Cashel. All right, so these things are in museums, right? They're not in the actual place they supposedly found them, right? So how do we know where they really got them from? Because this one's in Britain. The purpose of our remarks upon the sons of Ham and their descendants in Western Europe is not to prove that the genesis of things was with them there more than with the sons of Japhet, and to an extent the sons of Shem. In fact, all that we have advanced about them goes only so far as to show that they were in Europe and left their marks before going to the east. All right, so what he just said is, even though he just told you that a lot of these people might be descendants of Japhet and Ham, he's only doing that to show you that these people also were in Europe at some point before they had, because they were living under Japhet. He's the oldest. Before they, went to their places or their lots, or as he's saying, before they go into the east, taking with them the ideas that developed monuments akin to those of the land of the cradle of their race. All right, where's that coming from? Amaruka, the Egyptian, Indian, and Arab monuments have their Celtic art affinities, just as the people of Egypt, India, and Arabia have Celtic relationship of speech. The principal characteristic of the ancient Irish style of architecture is observable in the architecture of these countries. Massive stones laid in irregular courses and doorways having sloping or inclining jambs. All right, so we continue in the book Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes, 1873. This is chapter 9, and it says here Cush and Nimrod. All right, Cush and Nimrod. Before we continue, just want to remind you, again, they're just going over, possible relations and descendants in Europe of these people. And again, Ham is the progenitor of Cush and Canaan. It says Cush Ethiopians, Canaan Egyptians, or Mizraim, just in both of them, right? And you'll see Nimrod down here. Nimrod, right? Cush, Nimrod. All right, so we go back to the book again, chapter 9, Cush and Nimrod. It says the most influential and celebrated of the sons of Cush was Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, the beginning of whose kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. We have reserved from the order of our remarks upon the three latter places reference to Babel, until we treated of it in connection with Cush and Nimrod. Now remember that a lot of these places was actually built by Ashur, the son of Shem, the Assyrians, before Nimrod actually took over those places. There can be no doubt that to Semiramis was attributed a good deal of what was actually accomplished by Ninus. The testimony of Megasthenes, as preserved by Abidinus of Tyre, goes to show us that it was by Belus Babylon was surrounded with a wall, although some have represented that it was by Semiramis alone. This Belus may be distinguished from Bel, who began the city of and Tower of Babel, for the reason that we are told Bel had to leave both unfinished. If so, he could not have surrounded the city with a wall. We may suppose, though, that Ninus, as the son of Cush, inherited his father's title of Bel, or the confounder. The explanation then is that Ninus, or Nimrod, for he is called both names and differently, was the first to consolidate the Babylonian Empire, right? So he was one of the first to consolidate the empire. That's why he gets the credit as a progenitor of all the, those cities. But again, remember, it was Ashur, the Assyrians, their verse and go out from in scripture, and Nimrod eventually consolidated that whole place into the Babylonian Empire as we came to know it, and that he, like his father Cush, who must have left among the first Babylonians the impression of his greatness, was deified Bel, which word afterwards in most languages of Europe took the form of Belus. All right, that's they're talking about Nimrod. All right. According to Laird Rhea of Cybele, the tower-crowned goddess and goddess of fortification was a Babylonian goddess and the counterpart of the deity presiding over bulwarks and fortresses. Consequently, she originated with the mystical Semiramis, supposed queen of Nimrod or Ninus. To us, it is almost unnecessary in the present confused state of the question to Semiramis being the wife of Ninus or Nimrod, and especially as we have only proposed to treat a certain parts of the subject in this work, to offer any contribution towards the solution of the difficulty. However, as far as we can judge, it is quite possible that Semiramis was the mother, not wife of Nimrod or Ninus, and therefore the wife of Bel or Cush. The first remains of this Bel are to be found in the tradition, Druidic religion, mythology, stone monuments of Europe. Kronos or Saturn was Rhea's husband. Traced back to the original, we find that Kronos was no other than the first king of Babylon. All right, listen to this. Worshipped under the names of Bel and Baal. In the genuine copies of Eusebius, there is no mention made of any Belus, actual king of Assyria, before Ninus. So according to that authority, Kronos or Saturn was not only Cush, Bel or Baal, but Ninus or Nimrod. All right, listen. Under the name Kronos, Nimrod is known as king of the Cyclops, who were his brethren, and the inventors of tower building, Cyclopean. What may be in the general way deduced from the foregoing is that, with notwithstanding the different names under which Nimrod is represented, he inherited some of the nature and attributes of Bel or Cush, the confounder, which entitled him to be deified as his father was, and that he completed the tower and city of Babel, commenced by his father, who, if he conceived the building of this city and tower, may be fairly accredited with originating tower building, the invention of which is sometimes attributed to Nimrod. This may throw some light upon what are called the Cushite remains in Ireland, the round towers of that country. We continue in the book Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees by Anna Wilkes, 1873. This is chapter 10. And it says here, Kuthites and Hyperboreans, Kuthites. Colonies of Hyperboreans, erroneously called Kuthites, reached as far as the Maotis at the north of the Euxine Sea and to the coast of the Adriatic. They extended their settlements to Asia and laid the foundation of the Ninevite and Babylonian monarchies. In prehistoric times, we have glimpses of them as having from the west of Europe gone northward over Scandinavia and Scythia and Europe, Russia, many remaining in Umbria,